The purpose of today's episode is to educate parents on what elite long-term development should look like. I've talked about how, I think it was like in episode 1, that with training, it's a lot of like the blind leading the blind.
Yeah.
There's like everybody's copying each other, trying to copy a model that doesn't work. So we're going to talk about what this model looks like. It's a model that I use personally. Obviously, I put my own spin on it. And it's a model that's been used for many, many years by some of the top athletes, professional athletes, Olympians, high schoolers, down the kids. And it's called L.T.A.D, Long-Term Athletic Development. Istvan Bali is the originator. He's Hungarian. He's from Canada. He used to train Maria Sharapova. I don't know if you know the name. She's one of like the top tennis players of all time. But he's worked with athletes all over the world, different countries, over 50 different sports. And he's the one who introduced this idea. So I learned about L.T.A.D, I think back in 2010 is when I started learning about what L.T.A.D is, long-term athletic development. I'll say L.T.A.D just because that's a very long word to say.
Yeah.
So L.T.A.D is it's pretty much a system of training that factors in age of an athlete, psychology of an athlete, their physical attributes, and long-term health. Long-term health is actually a really big component that I feel nobody talks about. So let's say, for example, you're an athlete, David, and we're not playing. You're not playing competitive basketball anymore.
Yeah.
But what type of long-term ramifications did that leave you? What type of psychological impact, negative or positive, did your experience have? You hear of athletes. I was listening to Shannon Sharp recently, and he was talking about, he looks like a specimen, and I think he's like 55 years old, Hall of Famer, NFL, but he had his hips replaced. And he talks about like walking, he's in pain. You talk about other athletes talking about dealing with PTSD and their mind's not all the way there. And these athletes are,
JJ Watt. I mean, I think one of the quotes he had was, by the time I'm done playing, I'm going to be in a wheelchair or something like that. He's talking about how like his long-term health, like he understands that the sport, and he has an understanding of what the damage is being done to his body, but he loves the sport so much. And obviously it makes him money and it brings an income for his family. So he was always talking about how like, not too long after I get out of this sport, I think I'm going to be in a wheelchair. I was like, wow, it's insane when you think about all the damage, especially since he was.
Correct. The difference is you take an athlete like JJ Watt, he has millions and he has generational wealth, right?
Yeah.
The sad reality is, imagine having all this damage physically and having this damage psychologically, and then your kid never plays past high school. That's where it becomes a problem. Like, you can take my hip, you can replace my hips any day if you give me $200 million. Yeah. Like, sure. Like, I don't need a hip. I don't need my throwing arm. Like, I don't need a UCL if I have $100 million in the bank account.
Yeah.
But we're taking this crazy approach. And I understand the competitive side of parents and athletes. They want to go to college. They want to ultimately play professionally, baseball, basketball, whatever they're doing. But like, if that's the route you want to go in, you want to develop an athlete long-term, there's a right way to do it. So this model is for those athletes that want to be elite. Maybe you just want to be healthy. Maybe you're a parent. You're like, listen, my kid's he's not athletic, right? But I want my kid to feel like they're moving. They're not playing video games. They actually want to exercise and be healthy. So regardless of who you are, if you're an athlete, a good athlete trying to be great, a great athlete trying to be elite, a bad athlete just trying to be decent, this is a great model. I've been using it since 2010, and I've made a lot of adjustments to that model along the way. And what we're going to do today is we're going to cover every phase of this model. Look it up. You can look it up on YouTube. I know there's some really good books on long-term athletic development on Amazon. There's a lot of good information. And I think it's important because a lot of the parents, we've talked about how we genuinely believe all parents have good intentions for their kids.
Yeah.
but the approach that we take isn't always the best.
Yeah, it's like we talked about in the first podcast. It's if the coaches and the parents had the knowledge and information and understood how to imply it, they would do it. But it's not all there. It's not given out on like a handbook like we do at church. It's not like, here you go, here you go, here you go. No, it's
that's funny. That's funny. So I want to dive into it. So once again, L.T.A.D, long-term athletic development. It is a process of training to help your athlete be elite. Isvan Bali is the guy. And if you look him up, a lot of people are like, who the heck is that guy? That's some crazy name. I'm probably butchering his name, but one thing that we've all heard the 10,000 hour rule, that to be an expert, it requires 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
Okay. 10,000 hours equates to about 8 to 12 years for an athlete. So to be an elite athlete, it requires 8 to 12 years or 10,000 hours. Bali's the guy who came up with that statement.
Now, is that 8 to 12 years professional time playing the sport, or is that just from start?
No. Development.
Okay.
So if I'm, little Johnny and I'm 5 years old and I want to be a professional baseball player, for me to go from start to finish being elite, my definition of elite, college level, professional level, maybe even like elite among 17, 18-year-olds. So if you're a junior or a senior in high school, but he's the guy we've all heard, excuse me, the 30-day cough. It's still there. Sorry, you guys. We've heard that statement that it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert. Bali's the guy who said that. So without realizing it, most people have already heard about that rule, the 10,000 hour rule. He's the guy who came up with it. So he's out of Canada. So, but I'm going to go over there's 6 phases. I'm going to kind of skip through the first 2 just because I can explain. Well, I guess I'll explain it right now. It'll take me 2 minutes. So first phase is 0 to 6 years old. Like my child 0 to 6. What do I do? Let them play.
Let them have fun.
Free play. The goal is for your kid to enjoy activity, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a child who's 0 to 6, let them play outside. They can even play sports. You don't have to be organized with the sport. I actually heard a parent was talking to me last week how there's travel baseball for 6-year-olds. Wild. Let your kid be a kid, 0 to 6.
Yeah. Would you say from that time frame, so like basketball athlete, would you input some type of understanding and form within how they perform within the sport? Not yet. Just go and do it.
I would keep it as bland as possible. This is the ball. You put it inside that hoop.
Just put it in.
This is the ball. You kick it inside that net. That's a person. You got to touch them. It's called tag.
Yeah.
It's like, I want this to be fun, 100% fun.
Gotcha.
Because what the purpose of the active start is to develop fundamental movements, motor skills. So if you think of motor skills or think of just movement in general, think of movement as a language, as its own language, right? If let's say your vocabulary was 500 words and I said, David, I need you to go write me a novel. And all you knew was 500 words.
500 word long novel.
It's not going to be very, very impressive, right?
No.
But let's say your vocabulary was 10,000 words.
A lot better.
It's going to be a whole lot better.
Yeah.
The goal of 0 to 6 is to develop a vocabulary, a movement vocabulary, right? I want them to have balance, have fun, learn how to problem solve, develop some creativity. You'll see kids making up games. Go to a local park and watch a 6-7-year-old running around. They're like making up games and they're interacting. They're developing social skills. So 0 to 6, that's kind of the goal.
Yeah, the creative stuff, and I wouldn't recommend anyone do this, but I remember me and my friends, we take the football and we had the BMX bikes and we had the 2 pegs on the back and one of our friends would be on the back riding with them. And again, I wouldn't recommend anyone do this, but we would throw the football at the tires. just to get him knocked out. And that was our form of having fun in play. That was a bit back then, but you know, we were more aggressive and we would come up with these weird, fun games that we thought were fun at the time. Wear a helmet, but that was our form. We just found different creative ways to go about it. You know,
We're falling apart over here. I'm coughing. You're dropping stuff. It's all good. So 0 to 6, active start, real simple. Have fun. Increase your movement vocabulary, or as we call it in sports performance, movement variability. Right. Fundamental stage 6 to 10. This is actually where all three of my kids are at. 6 to 10 years old. This is where you asked me about like sport, where we're actually introducing fundamentals of sports, right? Exposure is is like the biggest part of this stage. Is from 6 to 10 years old. I want them to try baseball. I want them to try basketball. I want them to try unconventional sports. One of my sons does rock climbing. He's on a rock climbing team. I want them to try hockey. I want them to try jiu-jitsu. I want them to try, anything. I want them to try anything and everything. And at this point, child is going to be more competent regarding like the rules. So for example, I remember my son, his first football season, flag football.
Yeah.
He was playing 6U, right? That would be the active start phase. And kids were literally running the wrong way. And we're just cracking up. And parents are like, no, the touchdown zone is actually that way.
Yeah.
And you're seeing kids like, I saw another kid running full speed. He's running out of bounds. And he's like, no one's getting me. The whistle was blown a long time ago. And the kid's just like, oh, like that's a touchdown. Yeah. Referee goes, you stepped out of bounds 30 yards back there. So it's, when you get to 6 to 10, now like they understand the rules, they understand offsides. There's a lot less leniency on like breaking the rules where, a referee in 6U of any sport, they're going to be a lot more lenient. I know basketball, same thing. One of my kids, he played, I think 8U. I don't know. I think it's 8U basketball this year. The other one played 10U, and the 8U, they were allowing traveling. It was driving me nuts. Like obviously me being a competitor and basketball being like my favorite sport in the world. Kids would like pump fake, dribble with two hands. Pretty much it was running backs. They were playing football with the basketball and like steamrolling people and trying. And, I think at that age, I didn't let my kids do that. I told them because they knew the rules. They're like, Dad, they're traveling. They're double dribbling. They took too many steps and my son was getting frustrated. And I was like, it's okay. It's not that serious. And I had to explain to him, hey, everyone here is just learning. It's okay. It's not a big deal. But when they got to 10U, it's like they're calling fouls. Like if you barely touch them, they call a foul. If your pinky toe touches out of bounds, I remember they called a backcourt violation. And my son's like, what the heck is that? I was like, why is there a turnover? I didn't even travel. I said, you did backcourt violation. And my son looks at me like, what the heck is backcourt violation? Yeah. I said, you took your foot and once you cross the halfway point, you can't go back.
Yep. I remember my first time.
Okay. So the stage of 6 to 10 is learning fundamental skills. They're getting competency of the rules of sports. And they're developing a lot of social skills because trying different sports is awesome for kids. But one of the cool things I found with each sport is the culture is different. I remember like my son, he has friends from jiu-jitsu, right? He has his clique. And then he has friends from football. And it's like completely different. Even the parents are completely different. And then we have the hockey clique, right? And then there's the rock climbing friends. And then there's the flag football, there's the basketball, and he loves it. And it's so cool because all the kids are developing these great social skills, having exposure, so they start developing. I know one of their friends wasn't into like Pokemon, for example.
Yeah.
And then after the game, my son's like, dude, you got to get into Pokemon. And all of a sudden, he's excited about something he wasn't excited about. I know one of the the kids on my son's flag football team, my 10-year-old, the best kid on his team, stud wide receiver. He came to our house and my kids, they all put on the skates. This kid's an athlete. And he goes, "Oh, I've never skated before."
Yeah.
I was like, "Well, you're going to learn how to play hockey." Not me. My kid was telling him, because the kid's all like, "I want to be part of the cool kid table. Everybody in our neighborhood plays hockey." And this kid, who's a phenomenal athlete, he was the best kid on our team. He was like, "All right," we had extra skates, puts on the skates. And, obviously he doesn't do well when they're playing, but he's driven, he's motivated. And that's, once again, 6 to 10-year-olds.
Yeah.
He's open to constructive criticism, and something being cool motivates him to want to learn the skill.
Yeah.
I talked to his dad a week later, and then he goes, "Henry, my son, we're like looking on Amazon for skates." And he goes, "Shit, it's expensive. Everything's so expensive. What did your boys do?"
Yeah.
And the stud football player cannot stop talking about hockey. He was awful. Like, he's not an awful athlete, but it's a motor skill that he'd never learned before. So he looked like a baby deer on skates. And I said, "That's okay." I said, "That's awesome." Because now he's also learning he's getting psychological development, saying, "Hey, I might be this like the best player on the team in football, but now all of a sudden I go into this new world. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I could barely like get one foot in front of the other." And I've seen the same thing happen to my son in basketball. He literally, hard worker, right? But the worst kid on the basketball team. And he was coming from football where he did very well, and hockey where he did very well. And then he does basketball, and it's just like, oh my God. Like, I first had to teach him the rules, had to teach him how to how to dribble without carrying the ball. Like, I had to show him all the basic rules, and he was having so much fun. And then I remember after a couple games, I said, "Jackson," I said, "where do you rank basketball?" He goes, "Oh man," he's obsessed with football. He goes, "All right, football's number 1. He goes, "Basketball's number 2. And I'm just like, the competitor in me is like, "Man, you are so awful at basketball."
Yeah.
And he goes, "Dad,
That's
I've never
fun.
had more fun." Even though he barely scored a point. I remember when we had a kid on his team, I was like averaging like 25 points a game. he was a stud, right?
Yeah.
And my son's averaging like, 2 points a game.
If he's even getting a point in the game. Right?
Yeah. Launching the ball.
Yeah.
But he goes, "Man, it's the most fun I ever had." And he goes, "Can I play again?" I said, "All right, that's fine. We can sign you up for next season." But to see his progression from the beginning of the season to the end of the season, it was phenomenal, because there was no, excuse me, he didn't have the pressure of like having to win, right?
Yeah.
So
Just out there having fun. Just having fun.
he sat there, had fun, but the coach gave him specific job and said, "Look, this is your job. This is called a 2-3 zone. These are your responsibilities." And it was cool. Yeah. So with the stage of fundamental learning, kids are learning how to train. They're learning how to train. Yeah. So with each category, there's always going to be two caveats. We're going to have the competition side of the sport, and then we're going to have the learning side of the sport, right? And I think it's very important. And the training side of the sport. So there's actually three categories. You have the learning side, the training side, and the competition side. So the difference between all three, learning is the language of movement, right? We're trying to develop motor skills. Yeah. Training, we're enhancing those motor skills. We're adding speed to it. We're adding strength to it. We're adding power to it. So you can look at training as trying to acquire new stuff. Look at learning how to use your stuff as practice.